welcome back. Anthony, it's interesting here. We have a situation where we have what looks like to be a slew of books written by conservatives here in this post-Donald Trump era, where many of them claim that, listen, we had an election with some irregularities, and now they're turning to their big named talk show host to pump out the books in an attempt to warn America about the impending dangers of this political system and where we're going now, in regards to this dominance by the far left. You got Mark Levin, who released his new book entitled American Marxism, where he talks about the infiltration of Marxist ideologies within the realm of American institutions. And very similarly, you also got Ben Shapiro, who just released a book called The Authoritarian Movement. And is actually, the subtitle is How the Left Weaponized America's Institution Against Dissent. And so what's happening here, Anthony, is that the right is finally starting to understand and see the notion that we've had far left Marxist infiltration into the institutions of America. Right? Whether it's the educational system, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's government, whether it's sports, whether it's, go down the list. We Catholics, on the other hand, have been warning about this infiltration for a long time, right? Sister Lucy warned us 60, 70 years ago that Marxism would eventually encompass the entire globe, including America, in an interview. And many of us have seen this slow march toward Marxism. The only problem, of course, has been that American conservatives have failed or have not wanted to see this infiltration because they believe through the purity of the democratic system they can control what the future of America looks like. They celebrated the Cold War victory under Reagan as the Soviet Union fell, and we all believed that Marxism was on its way out. And yet, just like all the failures of the political right, they fail to see the greater scheme of things here, right? Because they lack certain spiritual awareness. Because as Americans, we've entertained this indifferent God of America, when in fact there's a battle out there that many Catholic writers warned about for really several hundred years. Specifically, really, in the past century, they warned about what was coming down the pipe if we did not heed the call to God in a sense of true faith and true religion. And of course, we Americans have never taken religion in its truest sense. We've dealt with these abstract ideas of religious liberty. But here we are. They're finally starting to see that the institutions have been taken over. And while we Catholics we've been ready to admit the problems within the church and some of the infiltration that we've dealt with in the Catholic Church, right? Conservatives have been much more hesitant to admit that their democracy has been compromised, Anthony. And here we are now, post-election 2020. They believe that the election was stolen from them. And now here come the conservative writers writing their books. I think this is Mark Levin's like 58 book on liberty, right? He's going to slam it home. Another book about liberty. Shapiro talking about authoritarian rule, authoritarian governments, which is interesting. I got some thoughts on that. But here come the conservatives. They're going to fight back and take back America with these conservative talk show hosts, Anthony, leading the way by writing these books. What are your thoughts on this, my friend?
Yeah, Frank, this is perfectly in line with American tradition, right? I mean, the founding fathers, as soon as they had it, last straw with the crown, the first thing they did, Franklin, Jefferson, Washington, they all went out and they wrote books. They all wrote books about it. And then they made the rounds in the local media there, selling their book about how... Do you see how ridiculous this is? Yeah, if they really believed that we had an election stolen, that the national security of our election system was somehow compromised, why are they not telling us daily how that's being resolved? They've gone back to the same talking points they always have, the same old stale talking points about liberty and freedom. And the irony of these books that are being released now, whether you're talking about Shapiro with this whole idea of totalitarianism, or Levin at least having the decency there to admit that this is Marxism, whichever way you slice it or dice it, they can never get back to the fact that it's the very liberty/license that they're embracing, which is bringing about the very problems that we have. If anything, let's ask ourselves who's really following in Jefferson's footsteps. What groups do you see today that mimic some of the things that Jefferson spoke about? It's not coming from the conservative camp. And I'm not saying these things are good. I'm just saying that the conservatives in the United States can't even live up to the founders that they so dearly love. And look, I get it. Stabilization is important. We need that. I'm for it. I'm not saying the conservatives should get in the streets. That's the wrong thing to do. The point is that the conservatives are failing to see that another book isn't the solution. The solution is Jesus Christ. The solution is his church.
Okay, Anthony, you're absolutely right. There seems to be a contradiction of sorts of sort of the historical remedies we've been given to political corruption in America versus how the conservatives are sort of acting and behaving at this point in time. Again, I'll say it before, I'll say it again. I'm not an advocate of revolution any kind of way. I'm not an advocate of picking up guns and turning to violence, because that's not the Catholic way. That is the classical liberal way, right? But let's start here. Let me play a short clip, first of all, of Mark Levin. He's on Sean Hannity's show recently. Let me play this clip of just Hannity right now praising the book.
Mark Levin's brand new book, American Marxism. Not only did it debut week 1 on the New York Times bestseller list, no. Mark's hardcover sales, that's only hardcover, sold over 329,000 copies. Now, that number does not include ebooks. A lot of people buy their books and they read it on whatever tablet or iPad they may have, or even their phones. It doesn't include audio books. It is an incredible achievement. Mark's new book is now outsold the next 15 books combined in the country. That's an incredible statistic. He's the host of Life, Liberty, Levin.
There it is, Anthony. Okay, this is how this works, okay? Because when I was in the classical liberal camp, I used to buy a lot of these books. All these guys do is they have their own talk shows, right? They got their own network shows on Fox or some syndicated talk show host across America. They write these books, and they essentially sell these books to their own audience, people that listen to them, people they've convinced, that their message, is valid in some capacity, people who like them. You talk about 400,000 books they've sold in a country of 360 million, 370 million now, right? Okay, so we sold a few more on digital. Listen, how do we say that? What's the old saying? You're preaching to the choir here. If you think you're selling these to some objective, non-decided voter or some Democrat, and you believe that your book is going to convince people how the institutions have been taken over by Marxism, I'm sorry, you're just preaching to the choir here. That's what you're doing. And this is how it works, right? Levin will write a book, he'll sell a bunch of copies, he'll make his money, makes a good living, because conservative philosophy is a great industry, right? They live a good living, and then when Sean Hannity writes his book, 6 months later, he'll go on Levin's show, and Levin praises Hannity, and Hannity praises Levin. They do this grand tour while believing they're saving America, while all the while, America is going further and further and further to the left, and nobody's listening to anybody at this point in history. This is how this works, Anthony.
I can't disagree with that assessment, Frank. It's a book echo chamber, just like there's internet echo chambers. This is a book echo chamber, just like you have mainstream media echo chamber. It's the same thing over and over again. Now, what's fascinating to me, and what they're not connecting the dots to, now Shapiro's even said this to himself. Shapiro has said that Catholics are the new Jews. Catholics are the new Jews. Do you get that? in this country. And look at what's being attacked here in the United States. Look at what's being attacked up in Canada. Look who's taking the blame. Like that beautiful episode you just cut on Frankly Speaking, and I'd encourage our listeners to go check that out here on Knights of Christendom. Go check out Frank's channel, Frankly Speaking. He just put up an excellent cast with a gentleman he brought on from Canada who breaks down everything that's going on with the school system there. And, of course, bottom line is it's the government who instituted these things. And basically dropped it in the church's lap. And not just the Catholic Church, by the way, but the Protestant churches as well up there. So we're talking about a government-instituted program. So, of cultural genocide, so to speak, right? It wasn't the Catholic Church that instituted the thing. They just had to try to take care of the kids the best they could because the government decides to go crazy. Now, that attack now there's misdirection. They're not going to blame the Canadian government. No, they're going to blame the Catholic Church. And then you see the churches attacked. You see them being torched. You see here in the United States, our statues being torn down, our churches being torched. And oftentimes, when it's not the leftist, it's literally somebody who is out of their mind possessed. We've had cases of that as well. So, the conservatives, for all they say they're conserving, they're not conserving anything. Your enemy is pointing to the solution. They're attacking the solution. These leftists aren't going after like right-wing base camps out in the middle of America, are they? They're not targeting Ben Shapiro. They're not targeting. Now, granted, there has been some limited harassment of these people, right? But and a couple of incidents of violence, yes. I'm not downplaying that. My point is that you don't see the concerted effort directed towards the political right in this country. Who is it directed at? It's directed at the Catholic Church.
Exactly, Anthony. You don't see these protesters tearing down statues of Martin Luther or John Calvin, for that matter. Right? They're not going after Protestant statues. They're going after Catholic statues. You know why? Because Catholicism is civilizational building. It is the backbone of our civilization, a civilization that the classical liberals turned their backs on a long time ago. And I think in many respects, while we may get some sympathies from classical liberals, they have no answer for these problems. And thus they persist constantly. Whether it's Junipero Serra, whether it's Christopher Columbus, another Catholic, whether it's St. Louis, you name your Catholic saint, that's what they're targeting. They're destroying statues of Our Lady. They're destroying statues of our Lord, breaking the crucifixes, breaking the arms off those crucifixes. They're attacking Catholics. They're burning down churches in Canada. It is open season on Catholics right now. And yet, for some basic sympathies, we really don't see much. Sure, you've had the Protestant baker or the Protestant photographer that's been attacked for, certain disorder issues. I get that. But because Protestantism, and really in some ways classical liberalism, doesn't have those overarching principles that are sustaining symbolic symbolism of sort of this worldwide generational history of our civilization, there's less to attack there. Catholics are the main force. Catholics are the main target in this civilization at this point in history, right? Now, let's get into the books here a little bit. Mark Levin, again, starting to understand, starting to see that the infiltration of the institutions has come about. Now, I haven't read the book. I can only speculate. Now, I don't want to throw Mark completely under the bus, Anthony, because I'm sure the book is well written, and I'm sure there's some very valid points in this book, but there's a shortcoming with Mark Levin when you listen to him talk, because I've seen a few interviews on the book. He goes back to the well, back to the conservative talking points, that essentially the very premise of the liberal ideology he promotes is what has unleashed sort of these classical liberal offspring that we will consider the progressives, right? It's not that he's giving anything new. He's doubling down on what has gotten our civilization to a breaking point. He offers no clarity of the cultural destruction, no clarity in how we're going to fix the family in this country. It's all about the political mechanisms and the right choices and getting out to the voting booth and putting the right candidates in power and cleansing the system or Washington, D.C. of all these sort of tyrannical progressives that he believes are destroying America. But as I keep saying, the progressives have been put in that position by the political system whose altar he worships at. This is the bottom line. We're not living in an era where we're going to vote ourselves out of these problems. We're not going to write enough books. There's not going to be enough talk shows. I mean, I think that the thing that gets me is that he has a microphone already on a syndicated talk shows across the country. I don't see how a book actually furthers his message. He probably reaches more people via the microphone than he does the book, to be honest with you. And yet, this is seen as the answer by the conservative movement now, where they're going to double down on the same ideas, only this time they're writing books to get their message out rather than the microphone. I don't see it here.
True enough, and I am not critiquing the content of the book. Like you, I have not read either of these books. I'm simply critiquing the fact that they are, as you say, doubling down. They're broken records. They say the same things over and over again. They rely on the news cycle. They rely on the left agitating so they can talk about it. They can talk about how terrible it is, and they can talk about how wouldn't it be great if we just had this conservative/libertarian society, this utopia that they keep hoping for, that they think somehow by continuing to say the same thing over and over again, even though they're losing the culture war, that this is going to bring about the change that they're looking for. They fail to understand this starts with families, okay? This is like that cast I did with Shapiro, right? Doesn't understand that family, pornography. Shapiro has kids, if I'm not mistaken. Right, Frank? Is he not worried about his own children accessing pornography, that damaging them, that hurting them? Is he not concerned about the broader social implications? He says he is, but he's not willing to do anything about it because of his political philosophy. Well, what about God's true religion? Does that not trump political philosophy in this country?
Well, I think the way Ben Shapiro would deal with the porn question is how libertarians always deal with the porn question, and that is it's up to parents to monitor their own kids. And while porn is free on the internet, he governs his house, and he's going to make sure that children, his children specifically, are not going to watch porn. And if all parents just watch their kids, because this is what self-autonomy is, this is what, again, the will of the people is here, the responsible citizenship that we all have a responsibility to take care of. We just can't have government come in and dictate to us. We as individuals and as fathers, head of household, need to govern our own families. And if we govern our own families, right, the porn is not an issue in our civilization. That's how they will deal with it, right? I mean, this is an age-old sort of libertarian argument that goes back to my days when I was in the libertarian camp, right? You don't like porn? Don't watch it. You don't want your kids watching it? Ban it from your house. That's simple. The question with pornography, of course, is, well, what about all those kids that don't have parents at home or do have parents at home and just don't care to monitor their kids? At the end of the day, we're communal creatures. And when we have 90%, 95% of young boys addicted to porn and girls reacting to pornography in an adverse way, thinking this is what they have to do or what this makes a woman or a young lady, and sort of what it partakes to be a productive, desired member of society, what do you do about those people, right? Especially, as you mentioned, Anthony, the family's broken in America. It's broken. We got everybody running around with iPhones. And here's another little thing. There's always workarounds, the pornography issue. That's the other issue right now, right? It's just an avalanche of sort of this evil that has encompassed our civilization. That's how Ben will deal with it. Now, I do want to take on his book. Okay, again, I haven't read his book, and it's interesting because he calls it the authoritarian movement, how the left weaponized America's institution against dissent. Now, I find the authoritarian sort of title of the book interesting. Again, I haven't read it, all right? But in typical classical liberal fashion, in their sort of understanding or their desired sort of in the system of democracy, they don't want a system where the will of the people, where the democratic process is interrupted in any way or made a moot point, right? They're inherently against all authoritarian governments, right? It starts again with the banning or the breaking away from the old monarchical system. They're very anti-authoritarian governments all over the world. They believe in the purity of the system, which is democracy, where we all have a say-so to get out there and do what it is we got to do in order to make democracy work, because we need a say-so as the people. Now, first of all, I've always believed that representative government is a myth, has been a myth in America since day one, okay? I'm almost 50 years old. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. My beliefs have never been represented by any of my representatives. They haven't been, okay? Second of all, notice the presumption here of just the title alone. Because they're anti-authoritarian, right? It's referring back to the virtuous notion of democracy and the purity of the system where we all have a say-so. But in the end, what we've seen is that democracy itself turns even more authoritarian, unjust authoritarianism than the old monarchs of old. Today's democracy, if you want to call it that, is more tyrannical, has more power than any monarch in the history of the world, right? It wasn't the monarchs that legalized abortion. It wasn't the monarchs that changed the definition of gender. It wasn't the monarchs that brought in all the sins of sacred tradition of the 2,000-year analogy of the faith. It wasn't the monarchs. It was democracy that brought it in. And now we got a bunch of little, Marxists, as Mark Levin claims, running the country, and the political right wants to distance themselves. Now, because they've given us this system, they've lost control of it, right? And now they want to say, well, it's authoritarianism, that's the problem. Well, it's your system that brought in this unjust authoritarian system. Let me fill you on a little secret. It's like historian Charles Coulomb said. Human civilization has always been governed basically by one dictate. You have the governed and the governed, right? The governed and the governed. That's how human civilization has always been structured. Whether it's monarchy, whether it's strongman leader, or whether it's republicanism, or whether it's democracy, it always turns into an authoritarian rule in the end. The question is, what kind of moral system of governance do you have to keep some sort of truth, justice, and decency within that society? In America, we use democracy to replace God, to replace a monarchical system that was given to us by God. And we did it in such a way where we gave secular authorities the ability to give us a secular system of governance. And now we have an authoritarian rule in America that the right has lost all control of at this point in history. And now they want to lecture us on authoritarian rule when this has been given to us by the classical liberals. I mean, this is very audacious by Shapiro. And they don't see this. They're blind to the fact that they gave us this system. Anthony?
Let's bring it all the way back to family, Frank. As the example, families make up civilization. Families make up voting blocks. Families are the backbone of society. So let's take Levin, Shapiro, whoever, it doesn't matter. Hypothetically, let's say they have a teenage son, daughter, who's very rebellious. Are they going to let that rebellion happen in their home? What if it's something that goes against their morals? They're going to allow for it? I mean, can you impose your political philosophy, your political libertarian ideology in your own home? Can you allow for that? But what if your children want it? Aren't you being a tyrant? You see, that's the problem. You can't separate out the individual from society or the society from the individual. We work as a cohesive group And we have to have mores that bring us together and unite us. This is why Catholic monarchy, in my opinion, makes the most sense to me. Because then you can have a just familial system of governance where it doesn't have to be total centralized control, with the monarch having the last say in every single thing. It wasn't that in every single civilization. And so they really are stuck in a catch-22. They're trying to impose their political view on broader society, their really philosophy of libertarianism, on the broader society, which is composed of what? Families. How's that supposed to work? We have to allow, because of license, we have to allow for people to destroy themselves and destroy their families. Somebody in government has to say this is wrong for my civilization. You've seen that done in the communist regime of China and the former communist regime of Russia. They have both banned pornography by way of one example, because they know it's destructive for their people. If you love your family, you keep the pornography out of your house the best you can now. Except we have political ideologues that tell us, oh, no. You don't get it. All those perverts out there, they get to decide, okay? They need their freedom. And you can't go forcing your moral ideas on them. No, sir. Well, see, in reality, we're not forcing anything on anybody. We are removing things from people that are destructive to those people and the broader community. But you notice the context they always put it in. The context is always, oh, well, see, you're forcing. They say the same thing about the church. Oh, we're the church. Stop forcing your ideas and stop forcing your Catholicism on me. And nobody's forcing anything on you. As a matter of fact, we're taking things away that are destructive.
Yeah, Anthony. I think what essentially comes down to is the failure to recognize true religion again. Because classical liberals have become so distrustful of government. Now, I know this goes back to a Protestant monarchy, especially here in America, right? Where we distrusted that monarchy for abuses. We have claims of the lack of representative government and tyranny of some kind, which is interesting itself how Protestantism always pops up its dirty little head in the nuances of history and how it really complicated things in that sense. But government is a fundamental function of civilization. Again, as Charles Colomb said, you have the governed and the governed. That's how human civilization works. The question is not whether you have government or don't have government, because you're always going to have government, whether you like it or not. The question is, what kind of government do you have, and what are the moral principles that motivate that government? We have a secular system of governance here that's unleashed the autonomous individual. And it's under those precepts of the autonomous individual that everybody has rebelled, including children in the home, as you so brilliantly brought up. How is a father supposed to govern his home if he has no authority to, at the very least, tell his son and his daughter this is wrong? No. And how does that extrapolate to the greater society at large? Right? Ben will argue in favor of local communities. Ben would say local communities can ban pornography. Okay, fine. I'm in Utah. The city of San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York, where the most heavily dense populated areas, say porn is legal. How does that work in the end as a nation? Do we all stay trapped in our cities? Do we all not interact with one another? We are communal creatures. And if one town says no to porn, but the next town over says yes to porn, guess what? Your neighbors are socially broken because of this one issue. How do you interact with the town next over? Especially as we think of, again, relationship structures in our civilization. How do you deal with a porn-addicted society? See, these are the questions that conservatives never answer. It's the autonomous individual, but we're not autonomous individuals. We all have to interact with one another. We need greater societal principles. Look where we're at. Look where we're at. I keep telling my conservative friends, you guys want to pretend like it's 1776 still. And yet we're becoming a Marxist utopia. I mean, even your beloved conservative authors are pointing out the obvious. Well, we Catholics have told you guys now for a very long time, decades if not centuries, that a Marxist revolution was coming. Now you finally figured it out. It took what you claim to be a stolen election, but you finally figured it out, right? And you're still preaching the same, neo-libertarian garbage that got us here in the first place. It's not working. It's just not working anymore. We have a civilization where we're at each other's throats. We have no common values anymore, no common customs, and in many respects, most of us don't even have an identity anymore, right? As you've immigrated here, we're 2 and 3 and 4 generations into this thing. Nobody knows what their cultural backgrounds are because we don't determine anything in America. We're autonomous individuals, right? For all we know is porn is our tradition, right? In America now, since we made it legal in the 1970s. These book authors, these talk show hosts, they're just not telling me anything that's any different than when I was in the classical liberal camp. And the country continues to go further and further to the left, Anthony. I don't know what we're accomplishing here. Maybe they make themselves feel good after a disappointing election. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's all about making the money. Maybe it's all about getting media attention. Maybe it's all about getting your names out there, right? It's good business right now. It's good business conservatism right now because you got a country up in flames just about here. With so many people dissatisfied, hurt, angry, and not knowing what the future looks like. This is what the classical liberal civilization has given us, my friend. Your final thoughts.
Frank, just to springboard off what you said, I think these guys have good intentions writing these books, but I think it's ultimately detrimental at this point in history. There's no answer in writing a book at this point in history. And I keep hoping that eventually one of these guys is going to see the light. Unfortunately, we had Sean Hannity abandon Holy Mother Church when maybe he could have been the guy to point to the church and say, this is the way forward in this country. This is the only way forward. Now, God works in mysterious ways. There is somebody else that I've noticed, and I don't think it's a joke. I truly believe that we are going to see many conversions from people that we didn't expect, from people we never expected on the right wing in this country to bring people to the church. I strongly suspect eventually we are going to see Dr. Jordan Peterson become a Catholic. That's going to be huge. I think right now, when we see people like Milo Yiannopoulos, who had a serious reversion experience to the faith, you can tell that it's genuine. Now, he still has some dust to kick off, but who among us doesn't that has had a reversion experience? I certainly have, and there have been a lot of people, unfortunately, who have said a lot of, I would consider un-Catholic things about the man. However, he's going to help turn things around. He's going to point to the church. And that's where the real challenge lies. The only way to take back the culture, see, Shapiro says we have to take back the culture first, not the political system. Fine, Shapiro. Are you willing to actually use the truth to do that? Milo Yiannopoulos is. He knows that the Catholic culture is the only way forward. In fact, he's starting a program to help people recover from these addictions like pornography. So I don't want to hear it about the books anymore. The books about liberty, they're really books about license. And that license is what has led directly to the very tyranny they're writing against.
Well, my friend, very well said. Listen, I want to believe in America just as much as anybody else. I have a lot at stake here. In fact, I have everything at stake in America. And as America descends into sort of the ash heap of history, and that's what it looks like to me right now, and I hope to God I'm wrong. But as America does descend down into something we don't recognize, the unknown, something that I believe now seems to be of satanic nature, I worry about my future, and I worry even more so about the future of my children. I have everything at stake here. And so do all my friends, all my families. And so it's difficult for me to sit here and say that America is a wounded animal that's starting to pass on in this life. Because there's so much here that we all need. There's so much here we're all dependent on one another. But at some point, we have to recognize truth for what it is and recognize our mistakes and have the courage to admit that we've made mistakes. We've made miscalculations. And we possibly have led others astray. And the first of which I would recommend, is repentance for our sins. First at a personal level, and then I think we need to talk about the sins of the nation that we need to repent for. Something that conservatives never want to talk about, right? And I understand the moment that we start to repent for our sins, they're going to have to hear it from their leftist siblings who are always looking to blame America for everything. But we can't be in fear of the political left and what they believe. The fact is, like I've said so many times before, here in America, through this concept of secular liberty given to us by the classical liberals, we have come to endorse, cherish, legislate, celebrate, and ship overseas every mortal sin ever condemned by sacred tradition. Everything our ancestors taught us not only was wrong, but evil, we now support in America at every institutional level, including government. We support it all at this point in time. And there's nothing to stop this now. You know, just the fact that we're having a conversation about the legality of pornography is quite amazing. No other generation of human beings throughout history would have ever entertained this kind of argument, unless it's a pagan society, right? A pagan society that was brutal and disordered in every way. You know, it's interesting. I found this piece from a atheist historian, actually, that talked about the greatness of Christianity. And I want to end on this note here, right? This is from author and historian and atheist Tom Holland. Quote, while studying the ancient world, Holland writes, he realizes something. Simply, the ancients were cruel and their values utterly foreign to him. The Spartans routinely murdered imperfect children. The bodies of slaves were treated like outlets for the physical pleasure of those with power. Infanticide was common. The poor and the weak had no right. How do we get from there to here? It was Christianity, Holland writes. Christianity revolutionized sex and marriage, demanding that men control themselves and prohibiting all forms of rape. Christianity confined sexuality within monogamy. It is ironic, Holland notes, that these are now the very standards for which Christianity is derided. Christianity elevated women. In short, Christianity utterly transformed the world. End quote. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The path back is Christianity. And what is Christianity? It's Catholicism. That is the roots of the Christian faith. That was Christendom. That which was governed by Holy Mother Church, through the authority deputized to them through Jesus Christ, our King. If we cannot acknowledge our God publicly, then we are doomed. If we cannot acknowledge the truth of the Gospels, then we are doomed. If we don't go back to the past and recognize the great civilization that was built upon the martyrs of the church, our ancestry, Holy Mother Church, the saints, the doctors of the church, and all the martyrs for that matter, then we're doomed. There's something in the past that we have lost, and we turned a certain corner in history that has led us down to one of the most destructive and divisive eras in human history, where we lost all our basic common sense of morality and all of our sort of cultural identities. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I just don't think the books are going to cut it from the political right. This is Frank. I want to thank my friend Anthony for joining me tonight. Signing off. Good night, everybody.